My name is Braden, and today I'm going to give you guys a presentation over my experience as a service publications intern for PACCAR Parts. So I'll start by talking a little bit about me, my background, things like that. I'll talk about how I got the internship and the company, department, and team that I specifically worked under. I'll talk about my job duties and some of the softwares and tools that I use to complete my job. I'll then go into work products and some examples of those as well. I'll talk about what I learned and how the courses I've taken prepared me for this internship. And then I will close out with the biggest challenges that I faced and what I would change if I had a second opportunity. So, as I said, my name is Braden. I'm currently completing a Bachelor of Science in Technical Communication with a minor in Content Strategy. Before I joined PACCAR, I had a little bit of technical experience as a lab assistant in the Tech Lab. And then lastly, I love to read. I like watching different TV shows. And here recently, I've gotten into playing games a little bit, but only on my PC. I do not own a console. So here's how I got the internship. Of course, I applied on LinkedIn. There are, other sites that you could apply to, but this is just the one that I applied on. I got a call back from the recruiter. I went in for my interview. The interview went well. There was kind of that waiting period. And then initially, I did get a rejection. I did get a second call back from the recruiter. To my understanding, the candidate that they had chosen had fell through. So she called me back and she asked if I was still interested. And I started about 6 months later. So here's some information about the company that I worked for. So specifically, I worked under PACCAR, which is a billion-dollar truck manufacturing company. They have 14 operating divisions and they operate across multiple different countries. They are also known for their incredible service to their customers, technicians, employees, and other parties. The division I worked under is called PACCAR Parts. They specialize in global sales, marketing, communications, and some other things as well. Mostly what I was doing was those corporate communications. The team that I specifically worked under is called Technical Publications. So, the Technical Publications team is responsible for creating, updating, and maintaining all of the documentation that is released from PACCAR. My team is led by a publications manager with three supervisors, and then we have kind of individual contributors under them. This team was split into two different tracks. So the track that I worked under is called Service Publications, and our other track is called Content Excellence. My track was responsible for upkeeping all of the service documentation, while the other track, Content Excellence, was responsible for ensuring that all of the content that we have that's customer facing, that all of it aligns with PACCAR's brand image and their messaging. So here are just a few job duties that I was responsible for. So first and foremost, of course, I was responsible for overseeing all of our service documentation and making sure that all that information is accurate. Another thing that I would do was to audit older documentation, and this is usually like operator manuals, programming guides, service manuals, all of those things that are customer facing, and I would determine if they were still relevant or if they still needed to be published on the site. Of course, through proofreading all of the documentation we had published, sometimes something needed to be changed or updated. So I would also submit those internal change requests. After submitting those, I would execute those change requests. So I would be the one to submit them, and also I'd be the one to actually edit them and update them. Some other things I was responsible for as well, organizing and deleting some of those internal files we have. A big part of my job was acting as a kind of liaison between my team and other SMEs. So SME stands for subject matter expert, and these are the people that are knowledgeable on our products, or our softwares, our service, anything that I'm writing about. Those SMEs are the experts that I would go to with questions. So I would be responsible for sitting with them and just kind of, getting some knowledge on whatever product or service it is I'm writing about. And through that, I would also obtain, new information, new graphics, things that needed to be added or updated in the manual, etc. And then, of course, I had some additional work that was assigned by a manager on my team, just some small things as well. So here's some of the softwares and tools that I use throughout my internship. So first and foremost, I use Microsoft Suite, nearly all of it, I think. I use SharePoint, I used Excel, PowerPoint, and a bunch of other things on there as well. And then for actual authoring and researching, I used Adobe Acrobat, I used DataWise, I used Oxygen XML, and some other things on there as well. Here pictured on the screen, I have all of the tools and softwares that I was unfamiliar with going into this internship. And it even goes back to things that are in Microsoft Suite like OneNote and SharePoint, but also it's most of those kind of authoring tools that I was introduced to and that I was expected to learn about and gain some knowledge on. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the projects that I worked on this summer. So one of the first major projects that I worked on was an audit of all of the manuals that we currently have customer facing. So I personally audited all of our operator manuals. That's because my manager primarily works on the operator side. So this is what she tasked me with doing. So I audited all of those. I went through them. I looked at, obviously the content, but I also looked at publication dates and things like that. And my goal was to evaluate the relevancy, the age, and the readability of all of the content that we have currently published. And also, another underlying goal was, of course, to increase my team's awareness of some of the content that we have published. Obviously, all of them are, pretty busy with their own projects. They have their own work going on. And so one of my goals was to increase their awareness of this and make sure that they know the type of content we have currently published. Another major project, honestly, the bulk of my internship was, technical authoring. So this is where all of the technical writing information that I got from my classes and that I got from outside of PACCAR came in. So this process starts with researching a change request that's been submitted. Now, I was talking about those earlier. These could either be internal, for example, submitted by me or submitted by another team member, or this could be external, where it was submitted by a technician or a dealer or, someone of that sort. So I would get this change request, and an example of a real change request that I was working on is pictured to the right. So that example is a safety message that we currently have published in our manuals. And the person that submitted the safety message basically said, hey, there's two of these published. Could these perhaps be combined? Could one perhaps be deleted, etc.? So I would take that safety message or I would take that change request and I would research it. I would make sure, hey, he's not lying. I can confirm this is true. There really are two messages in this manual. These really can be combined, etc. Another part of researching and authoring is to compare our content against our style guide. So this style guide is a guideline of how we want all of our PACCAR content to look and how we want all of our PACCAR content to sound. As I said, a big part of my internship this summer was being kind of a liaison between both my team and between SMEs, between technicians, between dealers, etc. And then the last part of researching and authoring was the approvals stages. So obviously this content is going to be seen by everyone, right? Everyone that works in this industry, everyone that works on our products, everyone that drives our products, etc. So all of our manuals and all of our content and documentation, all of that needs to kind of go through an approval stage. And there's multiple people and departments that see these manuals and see this content, and they all have to approve it. So it's not a one-day process. So here's a little bit about my takeaways from my internship. So number one, prioritization and clear communication is essential to succeeding in both an internship and a job in general. Part of our job as technical writers, technical communicators, is to make sure that our communication is clear and that it's understandable, right? So processes and documentation is streamlined and it's faster and it's more efficient when expectations are laid out clearly and information is communicated clearly. Secondly, I learned that businesses are always evolving. So it could be a project that I'm working on one day could be like high priority, and the next day it could not be. I could be working on something for a week, and the next week I could be working on something else because something has changed and the business needs something else. My manager needs something else. Something is more important, something is a hotter topic, etc. So that is all about adaptation and being able to move quickly and learn quickly. Another thing I learned was that as efficient as any team can be, there's always going to be an equal amount of efficiency. There's always going to be a process or some documentation or instructions that's always going to be, outdated or incorrect, or it's always going to be slower. There's always going to be something that can be sped up or something that can be done, more efficiently, things like that. So, it's not always going to be a perfect world. You're not always going to have the perfect answers. Another thing that's been a really big part of my internship was evidence. Evidence is very important, especially when you're pointing out something that, some people might not take too kindly to. They might not like that you're pointing out, some content that they wrote or some content that they worked on and saying, hey, this is incorrect. Hey, this needs to be changed. Hey, dealers and customers and technicians are suffering or their downtime is larger because this content isn't right. So, when you make an accusation like that, or even when you're just looking through, you always have to have evidence. And then lastly, connections matter. We hear a lot in our classes and just around the university in general that connections matter. But if you're like me, you just kind of brush it off. But after being in the actual field and being in the workplace, the work setting, connections do matter. You have to know people, you have to talk to them. So here are a few of the UNT courses that I've taken that I personally feel like prepared me for this internship. So I have them arranged in order from hey, this prepared me the most to hey, this kind of prepared me the least. So starting off with TECM 3550, that's our content strategy course. And from that, I learned about brand strategy and content alignment. So I was talking about earlier, my team is personally split into two different tracks, and we have a content excellence track. So I've had the chance to work with them a little bit and work on some of their projects. And it was interesting to see that hey, this is not just something that they teach you in class. Like, this is not just something like a phantom concept. There are companies and industries out there that really do value their brand image and their messaging, and they want to sound a certain way, they want to look a certain way. The next class that I really enjoyed and I really thought was helpful this summer was the technical editing class. So, of course, my internship is about technical writing, it's about technical authoring. I'm going to write. I'm going to edit. I'm going to, look at things, proofread things, etc. So a lot of those foundational concepts that I learned in the editing class were really helpful this summer. Next up, we have our technical writing class. So in that class, I took away some of the communication skills and some of those foundational technical writing skills. Mostly for that one, I learned how to communicate in a professional setting, right? Communicating with people that are higher than me, how to write a proper email, how to write a proper memo, how to write a proper report, etc. Those are all things that you're going to be expected to do in the workplace. And I thought that those were really important and really applicable to my internship this summer. And then lastly, we have our profession of technical communication course. In that one, I took away that there are different positions and different tracks that you can go down in the technical communication industry. So, I mean, that was applicable to this internship as well because I met all these different people and they were in all of these different positions. And, I had exposure to all these different areas of the company and these different areas of my own team. And so I had a mental connection that, like, hey, I learned about this in my class. I learned that you don't have to do traditional tech writing, you don't have to go down one path. There are so many other things in our industry that you can do, and you're not limited to one thing. So here are some of the biggest challenges that, I faced this summer. Number one, lots of busy work. You're an intern, you're going to be doing intern work for a while. At least that was my experience. It was kind of, it left me a little bit discouraged. I was kind of thinking, like, what am I doing here? But, it's just a lot of busy work at the beginning. And then, of course, with that, you get busy work because you don't have access to, these programs and softwares that you have to use, right? So it was just a lot of waiting, a lot of, hey, do I have access to this to do this project, to do this task? No, you're going to get access next week. No, you'll get access next month. No, we need to talk to so and so to get you access, etc. A big challenge for me was pinpointing where I could add value to my team and both add value to the company as well. That's a really big thing that they emphasize here at PACCAR is that no matter how small or big your work is, ensure that you're adding value to yourself, adding value to your team, adding value to your company. And, as an intern, as someone coming in from the outside, as someone coming in that's less knowledgeable than everyone else around them, it was hard for me to understand where I could add value and how I could add value. And then lastly, it took me a bit of time to understand that as an intern, I was allowed to have an opinion, right? I was allowed to propose a solution. I was allowed to speak up in meetings. I think sometimes we feel that we're outsiders, even though it's been proven time and time again that we are capable and we have the ability to do this, and we are here for a reason. You were hired for a reason. Sometimes it can feel kind of hard to speak up in those team settings and even just speak up to your manager. So it took me a little bit of time to understand that I was here for a reason. They chose me because I'm capable and I have the skills. And I am allowed to speak up and I am allowed to say something. And then lastly, what I would change. So number one, I would make an effort to speak with leadership and kind of those higher level executives. So, as I was talking about connections earlier, a lot of, speaking with those higher ups will get you into high places. When you sit down with them, you chat with them, you get to know them a little personally, they remember you. And when you're doing presentations or you're submitting an application, etc., they're like, hey, I talked to that person. I really enjoyed talking to them. Maybe they're a really good worker. Or they talk to your manager and they're like, hey, you manage this person. How's their work ethic? Are they a good employee? Is their work high quality, etc. And then the second thing I would change is I would gain exposure to other teams. So this goes back to what I was talking about previously, that there's, different tracks and different teams and different positions that you are allowed to be interested in. And so I wish that I could go back and I could kind of, learn about those different teams and learn about those different areas of the business just so I can discover more of like not only what is this company like, what does this company do, but also what am I personally interested in? If I decide that I no longer want to do this track, what can I move forward to? And then lastly, I think a really big thing that would have helped me this summer was gaining an understanding of the products and the initiatives that we're, doing, the products that PACCAR provides. So, obviously it's a truck manufacturing company. They make trucks. But what type of trucks? What do the trucks do? How are they, futuristic or how are they advanced? How are they integrating technology, etc. So I think that would have been really helpful. Overall, I have had an amazing experience here at PACCAR. I truly feel like I've learned a ton. Everyone I've met has been warm and inviting. It's been incredible. But that's just a small, snippet into my experience as an intern here. And it's been great. I would recommend it to anyone that's thinking about applying. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.